International Soccer Preview. We are Soccerphiles Canada. Welcome to our continuation of Series 19. This one looking at the players of the 2023 Asian Cup, due to be played in January 2024. This episode is looking at the players of Saudi Arabia. Here we go. Hello and welcome to the International Soccer Preview by Soccerphiles Canada. I'm Kevin and this is Series 19 on the players of the 2023 Asian Cup played in 2024. This episode covers Saudi Arabia's players. And we're doing this mediacast in two parts. Part one is I look at the candidates for the squad and their likelihood of making it. We think we went into too much detail in previous player mediacasts we've done. So we're aiming for a lighter, more narrative version this time. Part two will come out when the squad lists are released and the final squad selected. We think that'll be in late December or early January. And at that time, we'll go back over the list that we compile this time and see who made it and who didn't. And we'll also cover a couple of other things, which I'll talk about that at the end of the podcast here, or mediacast, I should say. We have made a separate video on what we'll be covering over the next 9 months. YouTube watchers can see the link to that on the screen, and it can also be found in the show notes for both watchers and listeners. In short, we're focused on the Asian and African Cups, both of them taking place in early 2024. And we've also started coverage of World Cup 2026 qualifying. So this episode will have 3 sections. Section 1, where we give and discuss some general information on the team. Section 2 is the main part. We compile a list of candidates in each position and try to determine their likelihood of making the squad. We're going to focus more on the main candidates here. And Section 3, where we give any closing thoughts and we'll preview part 2 at that time. All right, let's begin then. I have to begin with an apology to Saudi fans. I still haven't got a Saudi shirt, so I'm wearing the same colors, the same shirt that I did for the World Cup players media cast. And unfortunately, it's an away Germany shirt, but at least it's the same colors. And I'm working on getting shirts for your country and other countries, lest I insult them with my shirt selection. Just doing colors here. Okay, let's begin with section 1. And we're going to begin with some observations on the squad. So we have 2 things to say. The first is they played the Gulf Cup in January of 2023. That was after the World Cup. So a comment on that. We're going to ignore players who only played in that Gulf Cup and had no other call-ups. And in fact, there was one player who played in the World Cup and in the Gulf Cup, but otherwise it was all kind of younger, lesser used players. I'm not sure what the criteria was, but none of the big names showed up except for one. The other thing too is none of the players were really used that much afterwards. So the players who played in the Gulf Cup, a couple of them did show up on the bench or maybe for an appearance as a substitute after, but none of them made inroads really into the team. So we'll be largely kind of ignoring those Gulf Cup players. The second observation is a recent change of manager. We'll talk about that when we talk about managers, but in March, the manager who coached them through the 2022 World Cup in December, in March 2023, he handed in his resignation. And in August 2023, they found their new manager. But I gotta say, I haven't seen any kind of noticeable effects on that yet, especially when I look at the September and October selections. It seems to be kind of business as usual. or at least not many more changes than other teams are making. So, but we'll comment on that at the end because I may notice a few things as we go through the players here. Okay, retirements. Well, not many have retired since the World Cup. That was just less than a year ago. We're doing this in early November 2023. So no big retirement since the World Cup. But for other teams, we are going back to the 2019 Asian Cup and looking at retirements from there. So we'll point out a couple. One is goalkeeper Walid Abdullah, or Walid Abdullah Ali, and he was with the team from 2007 to 2019, and he was actually not selected for the World Cup in 2018 and on the roster for the Asian Cup in 2019, so had already been kind of making his way out of the team. Anyway, he does have 72 caps for the national team and is now retired from international soccer. Next, we have Omar Hassawi, and he was captain of the team in the 2019 Asian Cup. He also didn't see any action in that tournament, but in his case, it was because he was struggling with injury. So he was with Saudi Arabia from 2013 to 2019 with 52 caps and 3 goals, and played in the 2015 Asian Cup and the 2018 World Cup. Finally, we have Yahya El-Sheri, and he was with the team from 2009 to 19 with 72 caps and 9 goals. He's actually only 32 years old now, so still not that old. He was on the team in the 2018 World Cup and the 2019 Asian Cup, but hasn't played for the team since 2019. Okay, and one other note on retirements: we have players who have not been called up since the World Cup. So they were on the World Cup 2022 squad, but haven't been called up since. We don't really know if they're retired or what the situation is, but we are going to bring those up as we go through the player list below. Okay, next we look at the club affiliations, and this is quite straightforward. All of the players play inside of Saudi Arabia, so all we really have to do here is to look at the main domestic clubs that these players are coming from, and we try to reduce the list to 3, and so we will point out that the clubs players are coming from are Al Hilal, Al Nasser, and Al Ittihad. They're the 3 most represented clubs at this time. So no one playing outside of the country. And when we look at big names, big club names, I suppose Al Hilal is probably the biggest club that any of them play for. Al Hilal often reaches the final of the Asian Champions League. So it is a big club in Asia and probably the biggest name represented on the squad. Okay, let's take a look at their recent games. So for the players, for the most part, we will be looking over the participation over the last 2 years. But because Saudi Arabia played in the World Cup in 2022, for this and for some other parts, we're just going to take it from that point. That'll be kind of our anchor point. So we'll look at the games since the during and since the World Cup. So in World Cup 2022, that was in November of 2022, the group stage at least. And in the group stage, they played Argentina, Poland, and Mexico. And we're not really concerned with the results here, but how can you not mention that they beat Argentina, who eventually won the World Cup? But we will be more actually interested in the formations that they used during these games. After the World Cup, fairly shortly after, in January of 2022, was the Gulf Cup. And yeah, because the players don't overlap that much, we really won't be looking at at this too much. But anyway, they did play Yemen, Iraq, and Oman. They were knocked out in the group stage of that Gulf Cup, which was a bit of a disgrace. Friendlies since then, they have 2 friendlies in March 2023. That was against Venezuela and Bolivia. They had no friendlies in June of 2023, even though a lot of countries were playing games that month. September 2023, just 2. South Korea and Costa Rica, actually Costa Rica first and South Korea second. And finally in October, most recently, now this was about 3 weeks ago, they played Nigeria and Mali. So again, we're not really interested in the results, but let's look at the formations. And the formations kind of changed as time went. So in the World Cup, pretty defensive formation, the 4-1-4-1 in the first 2 games and a 4-4-2 in the third game. During the Gulf Cup, it was a 4-2-1-3 for all 3 games. But as I said, we're not really going to concern ourselves with that one. More importantly, it's a formation they've been using for the friendly since. Let's focus on the formations that they've been using recently. So that is the 4-4-3 with the variations. And the variations are most commonly used is the 4-1-2-1. So basically 1 defensive midfielder, 2 central midfielders, 2 wingers, and 1 forward. So that would be a good thing to keep in mind as we go through the players. And just a further note, really, it's always 4 at the back for Saudi Arabia. Let's finish this section by looking at their upcoming games. So they will have their first World Cup 2026 qualifiers. Actually, qualification began in the Asian region in October with a preliminary round, and we actually did a media cast on the 10 games or the 10 sets of games that gave us a good opportunity to look at some of the weaker teams in the region. So I was happy to do that. But of course, Saudi Arabia didn't have to undergo that preliminary round. So they begin in round 2 here with 2 games. So the first game will be Pakistan at home. Pakistan did take part in the preliminary round and beat out Cambodia. And the second game will be Jordan away. So we think that they can probably experiment a bit, and the new manager may want to do so in the game against Pakistan. That should be a fairly easy win for them. But I think when they play Jordan away, we'll see something similar to the squad that they'll bring to the Asian Cup, because they should be using their best players in that game. All right, let's move on to part 2, where we begin looking at the candidates. And now I'll tell you about that manager change that took place. So outgoing manager is, oops, I've lost my spot. Okay, the outgoing manager is Hervé Renard. So Hervé Renard took them through the World Cup in 2022 and actually remained on with the team after that. But in March of 2023, he put in a request to leave the team because he was offered a position coaching the French women's team, which he actually took through the Women's World Cup there. And so that was in March. In August 27th, actually, Roberto Mancini, the incoming manager, was offered the job. He was manager of Italy, and we'll give a little biography on him soon, but I'll just finish the narrative here. He was manager of Italy and resigned from that job on August 13th, 2023. 2 weeks later, he accepted the position of manager of Saudi Arabia, so he'll be taking them through the cup. So Roberto Mancini was both a player for Italy and manager of the Italian national team. He also managed some fairly big clubs, Inter Milan, Manchester City, Galatasaray, and St. Petersburg. So it was from 2018 to 23 that he managed Italy through the 2022 Euro Cup, which they won. And now he is with Saudi Arabia since 2023. But that's August 2023. So you can see he hasn't had a lot of time to really organize his team. And as we said in the observations at the beginning, we haven't really seen a lot of changes in personnel compared to that of Irv Renard. So if you think about it, the March games would have been Irv Renard's decisions, selections. There were no games in June, and the September games would have come very quickly for Mancini. So really in October, and we do see a few changes in October, but not as many as one might expect under a new manager. But perhaps we will see more changes in November as he gets familiar with the team. I do feel that there are some spots opening up on the team, which you'll also see as we go through the players here. Okay, so that's the situation with the managers, Roberto Mancini guiding them through. And let's move on to look at the goalkeepers. So as I say in these podcasts at the beginning, if you see a player's name in black, if you're watching the YouTube video, in black text, that means they've been through a tournament. If you see a player in grey, that means they have not been through a tournament. So we have, and what we're going to do is kind of list the candidates first, and then we'll come back and give more information, especially on the more likely candidates, and then we'll finish with a little narrative on the position itself. So let's look at the goalies then. Mohamed Al-Owais, a definite candidate. Mohamed Al-Rubai, a likely candidate. And then two possible candidates, Nawaf Al-Akidi and Raged Al-Najar. And then we have a couple of possible but unlikely candidates. We have Osama Al-Murmish, but we're just going to mention his name but not put him on the list here. And yes, that's it. So we do have a kind of a few candidates in the possible but unlikely, seem to be off the squad category, but we're really not going to mention them unless they have a realistic chance of making it. So sometimes we'll post their name on the list, sometimes we'll just mention their name, and sometimes we won't mention it at all. Okay, with all that out of the way, I can get on with things, and we'll take a closer look at the candidates here. So Mohamed Al-Owais is the starter. He has been with the team since 2013 and has 50 caps. And he was part of the World Cup squad in 2018, but he wasn't the starter there. He became the starter in the 2019 Asian Cup and in the 2022 World Cup. So we're looking at the 2 years of participation. So this stretches back before the World Cup. And over the past 2 years, he started 19 of their 25 games, Al-Owais, and was on the bench for 2 and not selected for 4 others. 3 of those being the Gulf Cup matches. He didn't play in the Gulf Cup. So Mohamed Al-Owais seems firmly entrenched there as a starter. Next, we have Mohamed Al-Rubai, and he is a likely candidate. Al-Rubai has been with the team since 2019, but only 7 caps. However, he was on the bench for the 2019 Asian Cup and the 2022 World Cup. Over the past 2 years, Al-Rubai has started 2 of their 25 games, but he was on the bench for 19. So just 4 matches that he wasn't selected for. So not a starter, but we think he is likely to be selected for the squad. And Nawaf Al-Akidi, I'm actually thinking of moving him to likely, but let's go through the information first. He's new to the team, just 23 years old, and got his first cap in got his first cap in 2023. He was actually with the team for longer than that, though. He's actually been on the team, I think, since 2021, but on the bench. But over the past 2 years, he started 4 of their 25 games and was on the bench for 10. However, he was not selected for 12 others. 4 of those he was with the under 23 team. That's why we have him as just a possible candidate here. However, Al Akidi did play in the Gulf Cup in 2023, and since then he got a start. Yeah, but he was only selected for 2 of the games since then, so I see why I put him as a possible candidate. So he'll probably make it to the Cup because he was the 3rd string keeper in the 2022 World Cup, but it is a bit concerning that he was only selected for 2 of their 6 most recent games. So Nawaf Al-Akidi, a possible candidate. The other possible candidate is Raghed El Najjar, and he doesn't have any caps for the national team. He got his first appearance just recently in September of 2023 and didn't start any of the remaining 4 games, but he was on the bench for all 4 matches. So a bit of a shout in there for the 3rd string keeper role, and that's all the candidates really we have. So let's summarize in a narrative of the position. So at the goalkeeper level, Al Owais, Al Rubai, and Al Akidi were the 3 keepers brought to the 2022 World Cup. Al Owais started all games there. He wasn't the keeper in the Gulf Cup, but he only missed one of the friendlies afterwards. However, it was Al Akidi rather than Al Rubai who was brought in to replace him for the 1 game that he didn't play. So Al Rubai had seemed the 2nd string keeper going into the World Cup, but now we're not really sure. It could be Al Akidi since he played a backup game, or it could be Al Najjar, who's been on the bench now for the last 4 games. So it'll be interesting to see in November which 3 keepers are called up there. But definitely it'll be Mohamed Al Owais on the roster. Okay, let's move on to central defenders and introduce the candidates. So we have Abdoulaye Al Amri and Ali Al Boulahi. Both of those are definite candidates. We have a likely candidate in Hassan Tambakti and a possible candidate in Ali Lajami. Abdullah Madu is a possible but unlikely candidate. We won't go into too much detail on him, other than to say that he was selected for the World Cup in 2022, but he hasn't been selected since. And we have a few players like that. So there is an outside chance of him making the squad, but hasn't been called up since the World Cup. Also possible but unlikely is Ahmed Sharahili. He has participated recently. He was absent for a while and then recalled in March 2023. He started 1 game, was on the bench for 1 game, and then not selected after that. So possible but unlikely. Ahmed Sharahili. And then we have a couple of players who, again, we're going to have this in every category, Gulf Cup players, but we're not going to mention them unless they've played since then. So we actually have 3 players here, and we'll bring them back in if they're named to the squad in the end, but we doubt they will be. Okay, let's take a closer look at our main candidates here then. Abdullah Al Amri has been with the team since 2021 with 28 caps. and 1 goal, and he was part of the Asian Cup squad in 2019 and the World Cup squad in 2022. Didn't see any action in 2019. It was, in fact, a bit of a surprise selection for that squad. And then he was a sub in 2022, but he gained the starting position for games 2 and 3 there. Over the past 2 years, Al Amri has started 12 of their 25 games, subbed in for 5 and on the bench for 2, and just 4 matches that he wasn't selected for, 3 of them Gulf Cup matches. So a staple in the team is Abdullah Al Amri, and we expect to see him, or we think he's a definite candidate. Next is Ali Al Bulehi, and he's been with the team since 2018 with 42 caps. And I think I won't go through the tournament history here. Actually, if you're interested in that, you could go back to the mediacast we did for the World Cup mediacast, because, as I said at the beginning, we kind of went into too much detail, we felt there, but the details are all there. So I think I'll just kind of clip it a little bit here, and if you're interested in further details, that would be a good podcast or mediacast YouTube to look at. Okay, so Al Bulahi was part of the World Cup squad in 2022, and he since started 16 of their 25 games. He was subbed in for 1, on the bench for 3, and not selected for 5. Again, 3 Gulf Cup matches there. So almost always called up, and starts more than half of the game. So Ali Al Bulahi, I actually probably should have him ahead of Al Amri. I think I'll do that. Just to kind of show that he seems he's more of a starter than Al Amri, as we'll see in the summary. Okay, let's move on to our likely candidate, Hassan Tambakti. And he also was selected for the 2022 World Cup. That was his first tournament, even though he had been with the team since 2019. He has 24 caps now. And over the past 2 years, Tambakti started 9 of their 25 games, subbed in for 2, and was on the bench for 7. However, he was not selected for 8 matches, which kind of lowered him 1 notch for us here. But we still think he's likely to make the squad, Hassan Tambakti. Ali Lajami is our possible candidate. He's really been in and out of the team. He returned after a 2.5-year absence in June of 2022. He started a game, subbed into a game, and then was off the team again until returning recently in October 2023 and actually started their last match. So for that reason, we have to put him as a possible candidate, even though up until then he seemed quite unlikely. Okay, so that is it for the biography section. Let's go and finish with a summary, a little narrative on the position. So 4 central defenders were brought to the World Cup. That includes Madhu, who has not been called up since. The other 3 were Al Amri, Al Bulahi, and Tambakti, who were rotated in the World Cup. Each one of them played 2 of the 3 games. Lajama actually did play in the Gulf Cup, and he was recalled, as we saw, in October. So maybe he will take over the spot left vacant by Madhu. In the friendlies after the Gulf Cup, Al Amri, Al Bulahi, and Tambakti continued to rotate. However, Sharahili got a couple of games, and as we saw, Tambakti started the last one. So Sharilihi there, Ahmed Sharilihi, are possible but unlikely candidate. But he did not play. He was not selected for the last 2 games, so we don't think he's a strong candidate. Overall, Abdullahi got the most starts, while Sharahili was not called up in October. If they bring four again, then it seems it'll be the three main ones: Al Amri, Al Bulahi, and Tambakti, with one spot up for grabs. So perhaps Lajani, perhaps Sharahili will come back in, or even perhaps um, Madhu. Sorry, yes, Abdullah Madhu will come back and resume his position, although that seems unlikely. So, looking forward to November to seeing who the maybe really the fourth centre back will be. Okay, let's move on to left backs, and we have a definite candidate in Yasser Al Sharani and a likely candidate in Nasser Al Dosari, a possible candidate in Ahmed Bum Saud, and that's it. Again, we have a few names on the list from the Gulf Cup and so on, but that's all we have. So let's take a look at these three candidates. So Yasser Al Sharani has been with the team since 2012. He's a veteran with 78 caps and 2 goals. So he was selected for the World Cup. He actually started game one, but was subbed out right at the very end due to an injury. It was actually a horrible collision with his goalkeeper there. And I'll talk about that more soon. So he started over the course of the last 2 years, 12 of their 25 games. He was subbed in for one, and then he broke his jaw in that collision with his goalkeeper, and he was out for 7 games there and not selected for 4 others. But he has come back from that injury, actually, surprisingly out for, I think, only 7 games there. And he has played in the last 4 matches. So Yasser Al Sharani, pretty tough guy, and looks like a definite candidate here now that he's back from his injury. The likely candidate is Nasser Al Dosari, and he was part of the World Cup 2022. He only appeared briefly in game 2 there. And over the past 2 years, Al Dosari has started 7 of their 25 games, subbed in for 5 and on the bench for 3, but not selected for 10 matches. However, he was fielded in 5 of the last 6 matches and on the bench for the other. So because of that recent participation, we have Al Dosari as a likely candidate. And finally, we have Ahmed Bamsaoud. So he is new to the team. He got his first appearance on the bench in September of 2022, so that was before the World Cup. He wasn't selected for the World Cup squad. He was selected actually for the preliminary squad there, but not the final squad. Over the last 2 years, he started 4 of their remaining 19 games, subbed in for 2 and on the bench for 3, but not selected for 11 matches, including the last 2. So a touch and go there for Ahmed Bamsaoud, I should say, and he did also play in the Gulf Cup. So he's one of the few players actually to be playing games for the main team after the Gulf Cup. Okay, and that are the 3 candidates in left defense. So let's finish with a summary. And we have Al Sharani and Al Dosari, the 2 players who were brought to the cup. Al Sharani started the first game, but then neither of them were used after that. It was out of position right back Al Break, and the centre back we just met, Al Buhaili, who were used in the second and third matches. Bamsaoud comes out of the Gulf Cup. No, he was used in the Gulf Cup, but he actually played for the team before that. But as we said, not selected for the October games. And so looking at the friendlies from March on, it was Al Sharani and Al Dosari sharing the position Al-Shirani played one more game, and we do think he's kind of edging out the starting position there. Um, we think Al-Shirani and Al-Dasari are the two who will be brought to the cup. Okay, let's move over to the right side and look at the candidates. And we have a definite candidate in Saud Abdul Hamid, and a likely candidate in Sultan Al-Ghanam. And we have two possible but unlikely candidates that we'll deal with quickly here. Fawaz Al-Sukour. He basically was called up for a game in March of 2023. He subbed into that game, but then he wasn't selected for the 4 matches since. So we don't think he's really a strong candidate. The other is Mohammed Al-Buraik. And he was selected for the World Cup. He was a starter in the 2019 Asian Cup and selected for the World Cup in 2022. However, he has not been selected since the 2022 World Cup. So we'll leave it at that for him. But if we do find him on the final roster, we'll, maybe kind of come back to him. But let's look at the main candidates here. So we have definite candidate Saud Abdul Hamid. So he doesn't always start, but he is always called up. He was called up for the World Cup in 2022 and started about half of their games, 12 of their 25 games over the past 2 years. He was subbed in for 5 and on the bench for 3, and not selected for 5 games. So he was with the under-23 team for 2 of those games, and then the other 3 were the Gulf Cup games. So he always seems to be called up. That is Saud Abdul Hamid. And next we have Sultan Al Ghanam at the likely category. And he has been with the team since 2017 with 30 caps, and he was called up for the World Cup in 2022. He was a substitute in 2 of the games there. He doesn't start much, started 7 of their 25 games over the past 2 years, but he was subbed in for 6 and on the bench for 4, and then 8 matches that he wasn't selected for. So he's usually called up. And really, due to the lack of other candidates here, we think that probably increases his likelihood as well. Let's finish the section with a summary. So Abdul Hamid, Al Ghanam, and Al Buraik were brought to the World Cup. Abdul Hamid started the first 2, and Al Ghanam started the first. The 2 right backs that we used in the Gulf Club were not retained, and that's going to be true for most of the positions here. So not retained means that they weren't really brought into the main team. Since the Gulf Cup, Al Hamid started 3 of the 6 friendlies. Al Ghanam started 2, and then our central defender Tambakti, who we just met, started the other one. So it's a bit odd that they brought 3 right backs to the cup, and as we saw, Al Buraik has not been called up to the team since. So I'm guessing that it will just be Abdul Hamid and Al Ghanam selected for this cup, and that they'll just bring 2 right backs here. Okay, but we'll see if I'm right or wrong, and we're going to move on to the midfield here. And we begin with players coded as defensive midfielders, although as we've seen with many teams that it's a bit difficult to distinguish defensive and central midfielders. So we're actually going to go through the candidates for both of them, and then we'll do the narrative on the position. So we have, as a likely candidate and coded as defensive midfielder, Abdullah Al-Khaibari. And, I'll just list the candidates here. As possible candidates, we have Riyad Sharahili, and we have Eid Al-Mulawad, or Eid Al-Mulawad. Here we have two players who have not been selected since the World Cup, so we put them at the possible but unlikely level, and that's Abdullah Otaif and Ali Al Hassan. Both of those players selected for the World Cup, but not appearing, not called up since then. And again, we have a few other names from the Gulf Cup that we won't put on the list. So let's look at these players. Abdullah Al Khaibari, we consider him a likely candidate, but he wasn't selected for the World Cup, even for the preliminary squad, but has made inroads since. Actually, he was selected for the 2018 World Cup. He was just a sub there. And let me see. He was selected for the Asian Cup in 2019, but he was injured and replaced in that tournament. So he's had a bit of bad luck as far as tournaments go. He returned after a more than 2-year absence in March 2023 and started 5 of their remaining 6 games. And he was subbed in for the other ones. So we're considering him a likely candidate due to that recent participation, and perhaps he'll get his chance at a tournament here. The first of 2 possible candidates is Riyad Sharahili. So he got his first cap in September 2022 and started 6 of their remaining games to this point. He was subbed in for 2 and on the bench for 2, and not selected for 9 matches, but that includes the last 6 matches. And I should have mentioned actually that he was selected for the World Cup in 2022, but we have to move him down to a possible level because he hasn't been selected recently. And in fact, he is the only player who was part of the World Cup squad and also part of the Gulf Cup squad. So that makes him look like he's, a very good candidate because they wanted for both tournaments, and yet he hasn't been selected for the last 6 matches. So not really sure what to think about Riyad Sharahili in terms of his chances here, but we put him at the possible level. The next possible candidate, Aid Al-Mulawad, got his first appearance very recently on the bench in October 2023, and he didn't start either of those games or even sub in, but was on the bench for both. So that recent participation forces us to consider him a possible candidate. Right, so let's not do the summary until we look at the candidates in the central midfield. And actually, basically, the bigger players are here. So we have a definite candidate in Mohamed Kano, and a likely candidate in Abdullah Al-Malki, and also in Salman Al-Faraj, who, though he's coded as a central midfielder, is kind of becoming more of an attacking midfielder, but we'll leave him here. We also have possible candidates in Ali Hazazi and Faisal Al-Ghamdi and Abdulaziz Al-Bishi. So a lot of central midfielders here. And we also have a possible but unlikely candidate in Hussein Al-Khatani. He got 2 starts in March of 2023, but he hasn't been selected since. So maybe I'll put his name on the list. That's fairly recent participation, but unlikely is Hussein Al-Khatani. Okay, let's go back and look at these players. So Mohamed Kano, since 2017, he's been with Saudi Arabia, an important player for them. 47 caps and 2 goals, which is funny because he actually did start as a forward recently. And he was a starter in the 2022 World Cup, and yeah, he started 18 of their 25 games over the past 2 years, and he subbed in for 4 and was not selected for the 3 Gulf Cup matches. So a definite candidate in Mohamed Kano, and a likely starter as well, although we're not really considering that much in this podcast here. So next, our likely candidate is Abdullah Al-Malki, and case in point, actually, he is not really much of a starter, more of a backup, but we think he's a likely candidate because he's so often called up. So Abdullah Al-Malki he was selected for the World Cup in 2022. He started games 1 and 2, but was suspended on yellow cards for game 3. Over the past 2 years on the whole, he's only started 8 of their 25 games, subbed in for 2 and on the bench for 1. And for 7 matches, he was out with a ligament injury. That was in the middle of the period. He has returned since. And he was not selected for 6 matches, but all of those were kind of at the beginning of the period in early 2022. So he's been called up recently and had that injury, but returned in October 2023. So we still think he's a likely candidate, Al-Malki. And our other likely candidate is Salman Al-Faraj. He's the captain of the team. He's been with Saudi Arabia since 2011 and has 75 caps and 9 goals. He's 34 years old, so getting up there in age. But he's been a starter in all of the tournaments, 2018 and 2022 World Cups and the 2015 Asian Cup. He was injured, actually, for the 2019 Asian Cup. Over the past 2 years, he started 7 of their 25 games, subbed in for 1 and on the bench for 1. He was injured for 6 matches there and not selected for 10 others. So actually, when I'm looking at it, I see I put him at the likely level mostly because of his reputation. He's the captain of the team. He's a veteran. But actually, in terms of his recent participation, I wonder if he's making his way off the team. He actually did return from injury. It was not selected. Was not selected for the last 2 games. He had recovered from his injury, but was not selected. So really, he should be at the possible level, Salman Al-Faraj, but he's such a big name that we have kept him at the likely level. Okay, the first of our possible candidate is Ali Hazazi, and he got his not his first cap. He actually returned from a 3.5-year absence, so he had played for the team in 2019. Returned from an absence in September 2023, so quite recently, and he started 3 of their remaining 4 games and subbed in for the other. So making a late bid here is Hazazi. Next, we have Faisal Al-Ghamdi. He's one of the few players kind of retained from the Gulf Cup. So he got his first cap for Saudi Arabia in that Gulf Cup and started 1 of their remaining 9 games. He was subbed in for 1 and on the bench for 3. And with the under-23 team for the 4 others. So basically just on the bench in recent games, but that's better than most of the ones who are in the Gulf Cup. And we have Al-Ghamdi as a possible candidate. And our third and final possible candidate is Abdulaziz Al-Bishi. So he has more experience with the team. He was a starter in the 2019 Asian Cup, but he wasn't selected for the World Cup in 2022, not even for the preliminary squad. But he returned in March of 2023 and started 1 of their remaining 6 games, subbed in for 2 and on the bench for 1. However, not selected for the last 2 matches. So kind of coming in and out quite a bit is Abdulaziz Al-Bishi. So returned for 4 of the last 6 games there. So we have him as a possible candidate. Okay, and that is it for the biography section. So now we can go back and summarize both the defensive and central midfielders. So 6 of them, 6 defensive and central midfielders were brought to the Cup. So these were, I'll try to put all the names on the list here. Sharahili, Otaif, Al Hassan, and Kano, Al-Malki, and Al-Faraj. And in terms of who was started, Kano, Al-Malki, and Al-Faraj made a kind of a three-man triangle in the midfield of game one. And Al-Malki played the defensive part of that role, even though he's coded as a central midfielder. In game two, attacking midfielder Al-Najeh replaced Al-Faraj, but Kano and Al-Malki remained. And in game three, it was kind of weird, actually. It was a two-man central midfield with Al-Hassan, who has not been called up since, and right back Saud Abdul Hamid playing in the central midfield. So a bit odd there in game three. As we said, Sharahili was the only World Cup player to play in the Gulf Cup. And since that time, an array of players have made up the midfield, usually three players in the current formation, a kind of a triangle. Kano and Al-Khaibari have been used the most. New players Hazazi and Al-Ghamdi were both tried out in the position. They got, I think, one start each. And they may replace Otaif and Al-Hassan, who haven't been called up since the World Cup. So, yeah, a bit complex here because we're juggling six players. But we're thinking Al-Khaibari as the main candidate. And then the Kano, Al-Malki, and those are pretty definite. And then beyond that, it's a bit of a toss-up. Al-Faraj, if his kind of reputation is respected, and then a couple of new candidates in Hazizi and Al-Ghamdi. So again, it'll be interesting to see, since there are two candidates leaving spots open because they haven't been called up since. Okay, we're finding that very few players nowadays are coded as left or right midfielders. Usually they're coded now as more attacking or defensive. The right midfielder is only used, right and left midfield's only used in a 4-3-3, but we see that Saudi Arabia's 4-3-3 is really a 4-1-2-2-1. So there are no kind of right and left midfielders. We actually just have one candidate. No candidates as left midfielders, and one candidate as right midfielder at the possible but unlikely level. But it is an interesting one. It's Hatem Bahebri. Hatem Bahebri, who's a bit of a veteran with the team with 43 caps. He was called up for the World Cup. He's been called up for every tournament since the 2018 World Cup. And called up here too. He just came in as a sub very late into games 2 and 3, so really didn't play in the cup. Despite that, he did manage to get a yellow card. But he hasn't been called up since. That's the key point. So yet another player who was selected for the World Cup and then not selected since. So Hatem Bahebri, we don't expect to see him at the cup. So, and he is a right midfielder there. So we're going to move on to left wingers, and think of this position as the upper left quadrant of the field. Usually it is a left winger actually in the formations of Saudi Arabia use, but it could be a left attacking midfielder, or the 4-3-3 actually makes it look like a left forward. Which it really isn't, but it could be kind of any one of those three positions in the upper left quadrant of the field. So let's begin by looking at the candidates. We have a definite candidate in Salem Al-Dosari, not to be confused with the left back Nasser Al-Dosari. And we have a possible candidate in Abdul Rahman Garib. And possible but unlikely candidate in Nawaf Al-Abed, another player who was selected for the World Cup in 2022 and who hasn't been called up since. In fact, he is currently unattached at the club level right now as well. So we really don't think we'll see him. And we also have a player, Sumayhan Al Nabit. He was in the Gulf Cup and did continue for 2 games afterwards, but hasn't been called up recently. So that's all we'll say about those players, unless they're called back in on the final squad, and we'll focus our attention on the 2 candidates that are more likely. So Salem Al Dassari, a real veteran with the team since 2012. He has 78 caps and 22 goals. He's one of the few players actually to play outside of Saudi Arabia. He was loaned to Villarreal in Spain in 2018. And for Saudi Arabia, he's been part of tournaments ever since the 2015 Asian Cup. In the 2022 World Cup, he was a starter, finishing all 3 games there. Over the past 2 years, he started 18 of their 25 games, Al Dassari, and subbed in for 1, on the bench for 1, and not selected for 5, which includes the 3 Gulf Cup matches. So always called up and usually starts not just on the left wing. Most of the time he is on the left wing or left attacking midfield, but sometimes does switch positions, central attacking midfielder. Abdul Rahman Garib is a possible candidate. He started 3 of their 25 games over the past 2 years, subbed in for 3 and on the bench for 4. And all in all, not selected for 13 matches, kind of in the middle of the period. So at the beginning and at the end, he has been called up. He actually was part of the squad for the 2019 Asian Cup, but not selected, a bit surprisingly, for the 2022 World Cup. And he's a winger. Actually, I think the websites quote him as a left winger. I've seen him quoted as a forward too, but I'm just calling him a winger. Over his 3 starts over the last 2 years have been once as a left winger and twice as a right winger. So Abdul Rahman Garib, a possible candidate here. And that's all we have for left wingers. So let's summarize the position. Al Dassari and Al Abed were brought to the World Cup. Al Abed actually during the World Cup suffered the ignominy of subbing in and then out, not just once but twice in 2 games, and he has not been selected since. So not doing well with the national team, Al Abed. Al Dassari was the left winger in all 3 games of the Cup. And usually it has been Al Dassari in the friendlies since the Gulf Cup, but Garib started in one of the friendlies, and he started as the left winger while Al Dassari was a central attacking midfielder. And then the versatile forward Abdullah Al Hamdan also played as the left winger once. So it looks like Al Dassari will be recalled to the squad, and perhaps Garib will take over Nawaf Al Abed's spot at the World Cup. Moving on to right wingers, we don't actually have a lot of candidates here. We have a possible candidate in Fahad Al Rashidi, and we have a possible but unlikely candidate in Ayman Yahya, or Ayman Yahya Salem. But he just was off the squad for 11 months and then appeared on the bench, just on the bench in October 2023. So we'll maybe put his name on the list, but we don't think he has a strong claim to make it to the squad. So let's look at the one candidate here and then talk about the position. Fahad Al Rashidi got his first cap or his first appearance on the bench in March 2023 and didn't start any of the remaining 6 games, but he was subbed in for 1 and on the bench for 3. However, he was not selected for the last 2 matches. So we consider Al Rashidi a possible candidate. So you may be wondering who is playing the position. Well, for right wingers, it was the right midfielder we met before, Hatan Bahebri, who was brought to the cup, but he was barely used there, and it was out of position players who have been filling the position. In the cup, it was forward Firas Al Burekan, playing all three games as right winger in the cup, and it continues to be out of position players in the role. Besides Al Burekan, who has played since, right winger Garib has played twice there. The versatile forward Al Hamdan, and even central midfielder Al Bishi. So they're using out of position players for the spot, and the problem remains. It seems like they can't find a player coded as a right winger. So I wouldn't be surprised to see someone new tried out in November for this position. Okay, and we move on to the forward line. That begins with attacking midfielders. And we here also just have one possible candidate in Sami Al-Najeh. And that's all we have. We have a couple of Gulf Cup players who are attacking midfielders, and they did use a 4-2-3-1 in the Gulf Cup. Otherwise, they haven't used it, this position, that much. And only one player coded as an attacking midfielder was brought to the cup. That's Al-Najeh, who we see here. But as mentioned, the position was not really used in the World Cup, and central midfielders played in the middle, except for game 2, well, where Al-Najeh was actually used. It was used about half the time in the recent friendlies, but it was out of position players filling in the role. So left winger Al Dosari and central midfielder Al Faraj, and once again the versatile forward Al Hamdan, all playing in the kind of a central attacking midfield role. Al Najeh did return to the team for the last game. But he doesn't seem a strong candidate at this time. Al Najeh was off the team since the World Cup, but he returned to the bench in October. So perhaps making a claim. But again, I wouldn't be surprised to see some new players come into the position here, or at least tried out for the position. For secondary strikers, we just have one candidate to talk about. That's Abdul Rahman Al Aboud at the possible but unlikely level. And he is yet another player who was selected for the World Cup 2022 squad, but who hasn't been selected hasn't been called up since. So Abdul Rahman Al Aboud, possible but unlikely. Let's move on to the last position then, the forwards, and we have a definite candidate in Firas Al Burekan as a definite candidate, Salah Al Sheri as a likely candidate, and we have several possible candidates here. So the first one is Haytham Asiri. Then we have the player I've mentioned a few times now, Abdullah Al Hamdan, who plays several positions. Fahad Al Mulawad. No, sorry, Fahad Al Muwalad Al Harbi is his fuller name. Fahad Al Muwalad. We have Harun Kamara. Wow, a lot of candidates here. And finally, we have Mohamed Maram. Okay, so let's go through these players, beginning with the definite candidate, Firas Al Burakan. So he's been with Saudi Arabia since 2019 with 36 caps and 6 goals, just 23 years old there. And the World Cup was his first tournament. He was a starter in that tournament. Over the past 2 years, Burakan has started 16 of their 25 games, subbed in for 3, on the bench for 1, and not selected for just 5 matches, including the 3 Gulf Cup matches. So always selected and starts about 2/3 of the time, Firas Al Burekan. Next, Salah Al-Shari also was called up for the World Cup. He started all three games there, and he's been with the team since 2020, so World Cup was his first tournament. 27 caps and 9 goals for Al-Shari, and he started 9 of their 25 games over the past 2 years. He subbed in for 5, but was injured for 4 and not selected for 8 matches, including the 3 Gulf Cup matches. So a likely candidate in Salah Al-Shari. Now we go to the possible candidates. So the first of 5 is Haytham Asiri, and we have him at the top because he was selected for the World Cup, the World Cup squad in 2022, but he only appeared briefly in Game 1 there, coming in at the 89th minute, so really didn't see much action. He's been on the team since 2021, but only has 10 caps and 1 goal. But he's 22 years old, so still quite young. So over the past 2 years, he started 2 of their 25 games and subbed in for 5 and on the bench for 7. So called up fairly regularly, not selected for 11 matches, although 6 of those he was with the under-23 team for. So Haytham Asiri still a possible candidate, but I suspect maybe overtaking him is our next candidate, Abdullah Al-Hamdan. He's been with the team since 2019 and has 28 caps and 5 goals. He wasn't selected for the World Cup squad, but after the World Cup, from March 2023, he started 4 of their 6 games and was on the bench for the 2 others. And we saw that he's very versatile. His 4 games, he started as a left winger, right winger, attacking midfield, and forward. So I wouldn't be surprised if they value his versatility, Al-Hamdan there. The third possible candidate is Fahad Al-Muwallad, and he was not selected for the World Cup in 2022, but he was part of the Asian Cup 2015 squad and the 2018 World Cup squad. He was a starter in the 2019 Asian Cup too, so has a bit of history with the team. Since 2012, he has 78 caps and 17 goals. However, over the past 2 years, he started only 6 of their 25 games. He was subbed in for 2 and on the bench for 3. And they considered bringing Al-Muwallad to the World Cup, but they were a bit nervous because there was a doping ban hanging over him. So the manager wanted him for the squad. He actually did name him to the final squad, but then I think the FA, the Saudi Arabian FA, decided to withdraw him as a precautionary measure. So anyway, Al-Muwallad is just a possible candidate, maybe struggling to find his way back into the team. However, he was selected for 3 of the last 4, so it certainly wouldn't be a shock to see him selected here. The fourth of 5 candidates at the possible level is Haroun Kamara, and he's actually not often selected. He returned after a 6-month absence in March 2023 and started 1 of their remaining 6 games, and was subbed in for 1 and on the bench for 1. And not selected for 2. And that's kind of his history since 2018, but just 12 caps, kind of, popping up in and out of the team, but not really firmly establishing himself, Haroun Kamara. So probably a little less likely than the other possible candidates here. And that may be true of Mohamed Baran too. He was one of the Gulf Cup players. He got his first cap in the Gulf Cup, and he only started 1 of their 9 games since then, but he did sub in to 3 and was on the bench for the last game in October there, and he was with the under-23 team because he's 22 years old for 4 of the other matches. So Mohamed Baran, again, probably a little less likely than the others. So a lot of candidates here to choose from. And then let's look in summary then. So Al-Burakain, Al-Shari, and Asiri were the 3 players brought to the World Cup. And it was Al Sherry who got the start. He was the lone forward in games 1 and 2. But in game 3, they had two forwards. However, it was not one of the players we're talking about that joined him, but rather central midfielder Mohamed Kano that was alongside him as the forward in game 3. So Al Burakan and Al Sherry each started 2 of the 6 friendlies since March. And the other 2 were started by Al Hamdan, got 1, and Haroun Kamara also got 1. So again, it wouldn't be, for me, the most likely of the possible candidates here is Al Hamdan, and maybe he has asserted himself to be ahead of Asiri, who made it to the World Cup, but now has a bit of a challenge. However, we see there are positions, so the secondary striker and the attacking midfielder position that we saw players brought to for the World Cup seem somewhat vacant now, so it's very possible that 4 of these players would be brought to the Asian Cup. Okay, well, that brings us to the end, and closing thoughts. There are quite a few changes since the World Cup, not so many since the new manager came in, but we've seen, I think, 6 or 7 players who were selected for the World Cup who were not selected after that. And that would have been Hervé Renard, the manager during the World Cup, making those decisions, at least at the beginning. Perhaps the new manager is kind of just keeping things the same until he sees a reason to change. The long and short of it is, I think there are spots available for the squad, players who were selected for the World Cup who won't be selected for the Asian Cup. And I wouldn't be surprised if the new manager starts trying out some new players, especially in that game against Pakistan, to decide on his candidates for those spots. So it'll be interesting to see the selections in November. And again, with a new manager, I wouldn't be surprised to be surprised, if you know what I mean. But let's finish out by looking at part 2, or previewing part 2. So we're going to go through the list again and point out any notable non-selections. That would be players that we currently see as likely or definite who don't end up making the squad. And surprise inclusions would be players who we consider possible but unlikely, or even we thought were off the team, which could include players we didn't mention here. There's quite a few. Basically, all of the Gulf Cup squad we didn't really introduce here. So we'll point out any surprise inclusions. And there's always a couple of new players that are performing well in their club soccer who are brought in towards the end. In addition to that, we'll also give an update on injuries. We didn't see any long-term injuries here, but there's usually a few to report prior to the Cup. And we hope we see you for part 2. We originally planned to tag on our past, present, and future plans for the mediacast, but we have instead decided to put a link to that 10-minute video in the show notes. It covers what we're working on and what we plan to do over the next 9 months. We'd like to thank Naber Abachan and Pictabay for the wonderful music you hear in this mediacast. The title is called Arabic Trap.